everyone. We are going to get started. It is so wonderful to see so many of you here, and I'm just really excited about the opportunity for you all to have to our wonderful, wonderful lecture tonight. My name is Mari Castañeda. I am the Dean of Commonwealth Honors College, and it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you here today for our 2021. We're always sort of dealing with the years, right? 2021 Commonwealth Honors College Plenary Lecture, The Poetry of Social Justice with Professor Martín Espada. I wanted to note that we are going to have books for sale in the back. So if you're interested at the end of the lecture, we're also, Professor Espada is also willing to do a signing of your books. So I wanted to thank Amherst Books and Nat Harold for a willingness to bring the books here, which are wonderful, not only the latest book, Floaters, but all the other books as well. It is an honors tradition to bring the work of thought leaders from across the UMass Amherst faculty to you, our students, and the broader community. In a lecture that speaks to the work our students are doing in their courses, the work we all do as thinkers and writers, and the work we are all doing to build and embody a culture of care. I am truly excited to share the many gifts of English professor and poet Martín Espada with you this evening. Professor Espada was born in Brooklyn, New York. He earned a BA in history at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and a JD from Northeastern University. He served as a supervisor of Su Clínica Legal, a legal services program for low-income Spanish-speaking tenants in Chelsea, Massachusetts. He has published more than 20 books as a poet, editor, essayist, translator, including Vivas to Those Who Have Failed, The Trouble Ball, Alabanza, What Saves Us, Poems of Empathy and Outrage in the Age of Trump, and many more. He has received the Ruth Lilly Poetry Prize, the Shelley Memorial Award, an Academy American Poets Fellowship, the Penn Rebson Fellowship, and a Guggenheim Fellowship. His books of essays and poems, Zapata's Disciple, was banned in Tucson as part of the Mexican American Studies program outlawed by the state of Arizona. The title poem of his collection, Alabanza, about 9/11, has been widely anthologized and performed, and has been a balm to the spirit for those affected directly by the losses of that day. The Republic of Poetry was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. His most recent collection, Floaters, has been nominated for the National Book Award. So please, at this moment, help me congratulate him with a round of applause. We often speak of writing as persuasion. Poetry, a language of distilled image and emotion, idea and human experience, is a form of persuasion that stirs the emotions, awakens the senses, and acts as a force to convey ideas that change the world. Espada's newest collection, Floaters, illustrates this power of distilled language to do more than make us think. His language serves both to humanize and call dehumanization into account. The book takes up its title from a term used by some Border Patrol agents to describe the migrants who drown trying to cross the border, and the book's eponymous poem, which Espada read on an episode of Democracy Now! In January 2020, was written in response to the deaths of Oscar Alberto Martinez Ramirez and his 20-month-old daughter, Angie Valeria. A photo of the drowned Salvadorian and daughter caused outrage and drew attention to the humanitarian crisis at the U.S. southern border. The poem also responds to allegations that the photo was faked and posted in an I'm 1015 Facebook group used by Border Patrol agents. Espada's poetry bears eloquent witness to the confrontations with anti-immigrant bigotry in his work as a tenant lawyer many years ago, and sings the praises of Central American adolescents in an internment camp founded on that same bigotry today. Whether celebrating fallen rebels and poets or condemning outrageous governmental neglect of his father's Puerto Rico in the wake of Hurricane Maria, Espada invokes fierce spirits in his work with what the Boston Globe recalls grace-laden defiance, and Publishers Weekly notes as visionary, combining sharp political awareness with a storyteller's knack for finding beauty and irony in the current moment. Tonight, of course, could not be possible with so many people that have helped through Commonwealth Honors College, so many to note. So can we give them a round of applause for organizing tonight? And so tonight, we are grateful to have the opportunity to celebrate the accomplishments of one of our own and to take in the gifts, questions, and direct challenges of a poetic intellect and spirit that bears active witness for justice in ways that truly change the world. And so without further ado, I would like to welcome Professor Martín Espada to the stage.
Buenas noches.
Buenas noches.
That's better. Well, thank you to Professor Mari Castañeda and the Commonwealth Honors College. Thank you all for being here this evening. And thanks, as always, to my wife, Lauren Marie Schmidt, who is here tonight and present on every single page of my book, Floaters. I will read mostly from Floaters this evening, and as promised, engage in a discussion of poetry as a form of persuasion that stirs the emotions, awakens the senses, and acts as a force to convey ideas that change the world, with an emphasis on changing the world, because we must. I'd like to begin, however, with a poem that's not in the book. It's a poem that I believe most of you have seen. It's a 9/11 poem. Of course, the 20th anniversary of 9/11 happened just last month. But this is a 9/11 poem with a twist. The focus is on the food service workers who were killed that day, mostly immigrant, and many of them undocumented, invisible in life, and even more invisible in death. Today, we would call them essential workers. To change the world, we must make the invisible visible, and that's why I wrote this poem. The word alabanza means praise in Spanish, and the title refers to the labor union to which they belonged. They are at the World Trade Center. Alabanza, in praise of Local 100, for the 43 members of hotel employees and restaurant employees, Local 100, working at the windows on the World Restaurant, who lost their lives in the attack on the World Trade Center. Alabanza, praise the cook with a shaven head and a tattoo on his shoulder that said, Oye, a blue-eyed Puerto Rican with people from Fajardo, the harbor of pirates centuries ago. Raise the lighthouse in Fajardo, candle glimmering white to worship the dark saint of the sea, Alabanza. Praise the cook's yellow pirate's cap, worn in the name of Roberto Clemente, his plane that flamed into the ocean loaded with cans for Nicaragua, for all the mouths chewing the ash of earthquakes. Alabanza. Praise the kitchen radio, dial clicked even before the dial on the oven, so that music and Spanish rose before bread. Praise the bread, alabanza. Praise Manhattan from 107 flights up, like Atlantis glimpsed through the windows of an ancient aquarium. Praise the great windows where immigrants from the kitchen could squint and almost see their world. Hear the chant of nations. Ecuador, Mexico, República Dominicana, Haiti, Yemen, Ghana, Bangladesh, alabanza. Praise the kitchen in the morning where the gas burned blue on every stove and exhaust fans fired their diminutive propellers, hands cracked eggs with quick thumbs or sliced open cartons to build an altar of cans. Alabanza. Praise the busboy's music, the chime of his dishes and silverware in the tub. Alabanza. Praise the dish dog, the dishwasher who worked that morning because another dishwasher could not stop coughing, or because he needed overtime to pile the sacks of rice and beans for a family floating away on some Caribbean island plagued by frogs. Alabanza. Praise the waitress who heard the radio in the kitchen and sang to herself about a man gone. Alabanza. After the thunder, wilder than thunder, after the shudder deep in the glass of the great windows, after the radio stopped singing like a tree full of terrified frogs, after night burst the dam of day and flooded the kitchen, for a time the stoves glowed in darkness like the lighthouse in Fajardo, like a cook's soul. Soul, I say, even if the dead cannot tell us about the bristles of God's beard, because God has no face. Soul, I say, to name the smoke beings flung in constellations across the night sky of this city and cities to come. Alabanza, I say, even if God has no face. Alabanza. When the war began, from Manhattan and Kabul, two constellations of smoke rose and drifted to each other, mingling in icy air, and one said with an Afghan tongue, "Teach me to dance. We have no music here." And the other said with a Spanish tongue, "I will teach you. Music is all we have." Years ago, I was somewhere very different. I was a housing lawyer, a tenant lawyer with Su Clínica Legal. Su Clínica Legal, a legal services program for low-income Spanish-speaking tenants in Chelsea, Massachusetts, right across the Tobin Bridge from Boston. It's a gateway city, a city of immigrants, always has been. My clients came from Puerto Rico, from the Dominican Republic, and especially from Central America, from El Salvador, from Guatemala. In other words, the same people crossing the southern border today, fleeing countries left in ruins by President Reagan's wars. The second half of this poem refers to the notorious Chuck Stewart murder case in the city of Boston. Ultimately, to change the world, we must all build bridges and walk across them. Jumping off the mystic Tobin Bridge, I close my eyes and see him windmilling his arms as he plummets from the mystic Tobin Bridge to prove me wrong, to show me he was good, to atone for sins like seeds in the lopsided apple of his heart, but mostly to escape from me in the back of his cab, a Puerto Rican lawyer in a suit and tie. I hated the 111 bus. Sweltering in my suit and tie with the crowd in the aisle, waiting to hit a bump on the mystic Tobin Bridge so my head would finally burst through the ceiling like a giraffe on a circus train. I hated the 111 bus after eviction day in Chelsea District Court, translating the landlords and judges into Spanish so that tenants knew they had to stuff their clothing into garbage bags and steal away again. Away from the 40-watt squint that followed them everywhere, that followed me because I stood beside them in court. I would daydream in the humidity of the bus, a basketball hero, flipping the balled-up pages of the law into the wastebasket at the office as the legal aid lawyers chanted my name. I hated the 111 bus. I had to take a taxi cab that day. "What the hell are you doing here?" said the driver of the cab to me in my suit and tie. "You gotta be careful in this neighborhood. There's a lot of Jose's around here." The driver's great-grandfather staggered off a boat so his great-grandson could one day drive me across the mystic Tobin Bridge, but there was no room in the taxi for chalk and a blackboard. He could hear the sawing of my breath as I leaned into his ear past the bulletproof barricade somehow missing and said, "I'm Jose." I could see the 40-watt squint in his rearview mirror. "I'm Puerto Rican," I said. It was exactly 5 p.m. and we were stuck in traffic in a taxi on the mystic Tobin Bridge. The driver stammered his own West Side story without the ballet, how a Puerto Rican gang stole his cousin's wallet years ago. "You think I'm gonna rob you?" I said in my suit and tie, close enough now to tickle his ear with the mouth of a revolver. I could hear the sawing of his breath. He still wanted to know what I was doing there. "I'm a lawyer. I go to court with all the Jose's," I said. Stalled traffic steamed around us, the breath of cattle in the winter air. "Where you going for the holidays?" the driver said. I thought about Christmas Eve in court, eviction orders flying from the judge's bench with tenants without legal aid lawyers or children old enough to translate the English of the summons did not answer to their names. Every year, the legal aid lawyers told the joke about the Christmas defense. "Your Honor, it's Christmas." I said to the driver, "I will be spending Christmas right here with my fellow Jose's." The driver shouted, "What do you want me to do? Get out of this cab and jump off the bridge?" We both knew what he meant. We both knew about Chuck Stewart, the last man to jump off the mystic Tobin Bridge. Everybody knew how Chuck drove his wife to Mission Hill after birthing classes, the flash and pop in the dark when he shot her in the head and himself in the belly. Everybody knew how he conjured a black carjacker on the crackling call to 911, the way the Mercury Theater on the Air conjured Martians in New Jersey on the radio half a century before. Everybody knew how 100 cops pounded on door after door in the projects at Mission Hill, locking a black man in a cage for the world to see, like the last of his tribe on exhibit at the World's Fair. Everybody knew how Chuck would have escaped cashing the insurance check to drive away with a new Nissan, but for his brother's confession, the accomplice throwing the Gucci bag with makeup, the wedding rings, and the gun off the dizzy bridge in Revere.
Everybody knew how Chuck parked his new car on the lower deck, left a note, and launched himself deep into the black water. How the cops hauled his body from the river by lunchtime when I walked into the office to tell the secretary Chuck Stewart just jumped off the mystic Tobin Bridge. I said nothing to the driver. I almost nodded yes in the rearview mirror. I confess, for a flash, I wanted him to jump. The driver, the cops, the landlords, the judges, all wanted us to jump off the mystic Tobin Bridge. All wanted us to sprout gills like moving monsters so we could paddle underwater back to the islands, down into the weeds and mud at the bottom, past the fish-plucked rib cages of the dead, the rusty revolvers of 1,000 crimes unsolved, the wedding rings of marriages gone bad, to we washed up on shore in a tangle of seaweed, gasping for air. Last night, still more landed here, clothing stuffed in garbage bags to flee the god of hurricanes flinging their houses into the sky, or the god of hunger slipping his knife between the ribs. Not a dark tide like the tide of the Mystic River, but builders of bridges. You can walk across the bridges they build, or you can jump. Two Salvadoran migrants, father and daughter, who came to be known as Oscar and Valeria, drowned crossing Rio Grande in June of 2019. A photograph of their bodies went viral. Maybe you saw it, sparking outrage, sparking grief, and also sparking denial, trutherism. There was a post in the I'm 1015 Border Patrol Facebook group charging that this photo was a fake. The following poem speaks to that photograph and these charges. Floaters takes its title from the term used by members of the Border Patrol to describe those who drown crossing over. To change the world, we must humanize the dehumanized. We must say their names. Floaters. Epigraph. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and ask, have y'all ever seen floaters this clean? I'm not trying to be an ass, but I have never seen floaters like this. Could this be another edited photo? We've all seen the Dems and liberal parties do some pretty sick things. Anonymous post, I'm 1015, Border Patrol Facebook group. Like a beer bottle thrown into the river by a boy too drunk to cry. Like the shard of a styrofoam cup drained of coffee, brown as the river. Like the plank of a fishing boat broken in half by the river, the dead float. And the dead have a name. Floaters, say the men of the Border Patrol, keeping watch all night by the river, hearts pumping coffee as they say the word floaters, soft as a bubble hard as a shoe, as it nudges the body to see if it breathes, to see if it moans, to see if it sits up and speaks. And the dead have names. A feast day parade of names. Names that dress all in red. Names that twirl skirts. Names that blow whistles. Names that shake rattles. Names that sing in praise of the saints. Say, Oscar Alberto Martinez Ramirez. Say, Angie Valeria Martinez Avalos. See how they rise off the tongue, the calling of bird to bird somewhere in the trees above our heads, trilling in the dark heart of the leaves. Say what we know of them now they are dead. Oscar slapped dough for pizza with oven, blistered fingers. Daughter Valeria sang, banging a toy guitar. He slipped free of the apron he wore on the blast of the oven, sold the motorcycle he would kick till it sputtered to life, counted off pesos for the journey across the river, and the last of his 25 years, and the last of her 23 months. There is another name that beats its wings in the heart of the trees. Say, Tanya Vanessa Avalos, Oscar's wife and Valeria's mother, the witness stumbling along the river. Now their names rise off her tongue. Say, Oscar y Valeria. He swam from Matamoros across to Brownsville. The girl slung around his neck stood her in the weeds on the Texas side of the river, swore to return with her mother in hand, turning his back as fathers do, who later say, I turned around and she was gone. In the time it takes for a bird to hop from branch to branch, Valeria jumped in the river after her father. Maybe he called out her name as he swept her up from the river. Maybe the river drowned out his voice as the water swept them away. Tanya called out the names of the saints, but the saints drowsed in the stupor of birds in the dark, their cages covered with blankets. The men on patrol would never hear their pleas for asylum, watching for floaters, hearts pumping coffee all night on the Texas side of the river. No one, they say, had ever seen floaters this clean. Oscar's black shirt yanked up to the armpits, Valeria's arm slung around her father's neck, even after the light left her eyes, both face down in the weeds back on the Mexican side of the river. Another edited photo. See how her head disappears in his shirt, the waterlogged diaper bunched in her pants, the blue of the blue cans. The radio warned us about the crisis actors we see at one school shooting after another. The man called, Oscar will breathe, sit up, speak, tug the black shirt over his head, shower off the mud, and shake hands with the photographer. Yet, the floaters did not float down the Rio Grande like Olympians showing off the backstroke, nor did their souls float up to Dallas, land of rumored jobs and a president shot in the head as he waved from his motorcade. No bubbles rose from their breath in the mud, light as the iridescent circles of soap that would fascinate a 2-year-old. And the dead still have names. Names that sing in praise of the saints. Names, the flower and blossoms of white. A cortege of names dressed all in black, trailing the coffins to the cemetery. Carve their names in headlines and gravestones they would never know in the kitchens of this cacophonous world. Enter their names in the book of names. Say, Oscar Alberto Martinez Ramirez. Say, Angie Valeria Martinez Avalos. Bury them in a corner of the cemetery named for the sainted Archbishop of the Poor, shot in the heart saying Mass, bullets
bought by the taxes I paid when I worked as a bouncer and fractured my hand 40 years ago, and bumper stickers read, El Salvador is Spanish for Vietnam. When the last bubble of breath escapes the body, may the men who speak of floaters, who have never seen floaters this clean, float through the clouds to the heavens, where they paddle the air as they wait for the saint who flips through the keys on his ring like a drowsy janitor, till he fingers the key that turns the lock and shuts the gate on their babble-tongued faces, and they plunge back to earth, a shower of hailstones pelting the river, the Mexican side of the river. Last March, there was an article in Time magazine called "A Cage is Still a Cage. President Biden must end U.S. detention of children and families." Dr. Satuski Ina, an activist and psychotherapist born behind barbed wire at an internment camp for Japanese Americans during World War II, condemned President Biden's detention centers for migrant children, and they're still out there. My dear friend Camilo Perez Bustillo was an organizer of the campaign to shut down the internment camp in Tornillo, Texas, under President Trump. He interviewed migrant children there, and that's how I learned of their creative protest. And to change the world, we need creative protest from all quarters. So this poem is for them. Ode to the soccer ball sailing over a barbed wire fence. Epigraph. Tornillo has become the symbol of what may be the largest U.S. mass detention of children not charged with crimes since the World War II internment of Japanese Americans. Robert Moore, Texas Monthly. Praise Tornillo. Word for screw in Spanish. Word for jailer in English. Word for 3,000 adolescent migrants incarcerated in camp. Praise the 3,000 soccer balls gift wrapped at Christmas as if raindrops in the desert inflated and bounced through the door. Praise the soccer games rotating with a whistle every 20 minutes so 3,000 adolescent migrants could take turns kicking a ball. Praise the boys and girls who walked 1,000 miles, blood-caked in their toes, yelling in Spanish and a dozen Mayan tongues on the field. Praise the first teenager, brain ablaze like chili pepper Christmas lights, to kick a soccer ball high over the chain link and barbed wire fence. Praise the first teenager to scrawl a name and number on the face of the ball, then boot it all the way to the dirt road on the other side. Praise the smirk of teenagers at the jailers scooping up fugitive soccer balls, jabbering about the ingratitude of teenagers at Christmas. Praise the soccer ball sailing over the barbed wire fence, white and black like the moon, yellow like the sun, blue like the world. Praise the soccer ball flying to the moon, flying to the sun, flying to other worlds, flying to Antigua, Guatemala, where Starbucks buys coffee beans. Praise the soccer ball bounding off the lawn at the White House, thudding off the president's head as he waves to absolutely no one. Praise the piñata of the president's head, jelly beans pouring from his ears, enough to feed 3,000 adolescents incarcerated at Tornillo. Praise Tornillo.
word in Spanish for adolescent migrant internment camp, abandoned by jailers in the desert, liberated by a blizzard of soccer balls. So I was imagining President Trump's head being full of jelly beans. I don't know what Biden's head is full of. Well, times of hate always call for poems of love. So here is a love poem. Now, since it's me, this is a political love poem. My wife, Lauren, I mentioned earlier, is a poet with 4 books to her credit. She's a novelist and a very committed teacher. She taught for many years in urban education, especially in Paterson, New Jersey, and here in Springfield, Massachusetts. She would leave in the dark and come home in the dark. To change the world, we need that kind of commitment. The teachers who leave in the dark and come home in the dark. That's going to be some of you out there. An aubade is a French verse form about the parting of lovers at dawn. And did we ever? This is called aubade with concussion. Epigraph. Poverty is black ice. Naomi Ajala. You leave me sleeping in the dark. You kiss me and I stir, fingers in your hair, eyes open, unseeing. You leave me asleep every morning, commuting to the school in the city at sunrise. The landlord's driveway, a muddy creek, ices over hard after the freezing rain clatters all night. Your feet fly up, your head slamming the ground, an eclipse of the sun flooding your eyes. You sleep under the car. No one knows how long you sleep. You awake with 100 ice picks stabbing your eardrums. You awake, coat and hair soaked, and somehow drive to school. You remember to turn left at the Smith & Wesson factory. The other teachers lead you by the elbow to Mercy Hospital, where you pause when the nurse asks your name, where you claim your pain level is a 4, and they slide you into the white coffin of an MRI machine. You hold your breath. They film your brain. Concussion. The word we use for the boxer plunging face first to the canvas after the uppercut blindsided him, not the teacher commuting to school at sunrise in a Subaru Crosstrek. Yet, you would drive, ears hammering as they hammer in the purgatory of the MRI. A week before, Isabella came to you in the classroom and said, "Miss, I cannot sleep. 3 days, I cannot sleep." Her boyfriend called at 2 a.m. and she did not pick up. At 3 a.m., a single shot to the head put him to sleep, and he will sleep forever, his body hidden beneath a car in a parking lot on Maple Street. The cops, the television cameras, the neighbors all gathering at the yellow tape carnival of his corpse. You said to Isabella, "Take this journal, write it down. You don't have to show me. You don't have to show anyone." On the cover of the journal you bought at the drugstore was the word dream.
Isabella sat there in your classroom at your desk, pencil waving in furious circles. By lunchtime, as her friends slapped each other, Isabella slept, head on the desk, face pressed against the pages of the journal. This is why I watch you sleep at 3 a.m. when the sleeping pills fail to quell the strike meeting in my brain. This is why I say to you when you kiss me in my sleep, don't go, don't go. You have to go. So this is another political love poem. I think some of you have read this. Lauren taught at a place called Ava's Village in Paterson, New Jersey, an anti-poverty organization and a residential substance abuse program serving mostly African American and Latinx clients. The poem I wrote refers to Lift Every Voice and Sing by James Weldon Johnson, a poem set to music and commonly known as the Black National Anthem, and in the poem, sung by everybody. My poem also refers to Victor Jara, J-A-R-A, the great singer, songwriter, and guitarist of Chile, murdered by the military in the 1973 coup backed by the United States. The poem is called That We Will Sing, because to change the world, we need songs and we need singers. That we will sing. I call you a saint, washing dishes at the soup kitchen, tutoring men who cannot write their own names, teaching poetry to the addicts. And I imagine Saint Sebastian, female and voluptuous this time, no arrows this time, white robe slipping to her waist, writhing in ecstasy at the touch of an invisible hand, green eyes cast heavenward, though we know there is no God in Paterson. Yet, in poetry class today, you gave the addicts a poem, and they sang the poem back to you. Lift every voice and sing. And so they did, even the man with one arm. And so their voices became human again, not the baying of wolves to be shot on sight by police after sundown, but church voices, school voices, voices before the needle flooded their bodies and drowned all the songs, all the poems they knew. I imagine Victor Jara rousing the crowd in Santiago de Chile to sing the last verse of his peasant's prayer. Levántate y mírate las manos. Rise up and look at your hands. How the crowd sang the song from memory back to the singer. Even the words he sang as if he could foresee the coup, the officer's revolver in his ear. Ahora y en la hora de nuestra muerte, now and in the hour of our death. Amen. Afterwards, the addicts in a circle of folding chairs rose for you, speaking of God in Paterson to their teacher, the heretic, reaching for your hands as if they could take the spirit in your skin back to the shelter where they sleep tonight, touching you the way I touch you sometimes, not in lust, but in astonishment, telling myself I did not imagine you, that you are here, that we will sing. To change the world, we need visions, and we need visionaries. Luis Gardenacota. Luis was a dear friend and an early mentor of mine. He was a brilliant organizer and activist, Puerto Rican and Dominican. He co-founded El Puente, a multi-purpose community center in the Williamsburg section of Brooklyn, also known as Los Sures. I was in law school, first year, when he took me to an abandoned church to share his dream. And now I share it with you. This poem is called Morir Soñando, which literally means to die dreaming. It's also the name of a drink in the Dominican Republic. Morir Soñando for Luis Gardenacota, 1945 to 2019, Brooklyn, New York. I saw the empty cross atop the empty church on South 4th Street, as if Jesus flapped his arms and flew away, spooked by one ambulance siren too many. I saw the stained glass windows I wanted to break with a brick, the mural of St. Mary and the angels hovering innocent as spies over the congregation. I wanted to know why you brought me here, the son of a man punched in the face by a priest for questioning the Trinity, who punched him back. This is El Puente, you said. The bridge. I knew about the Williamsburg Bridge. 8 lanes of traffic and the subway stampeding in the open windows of the barrio all summer. You spread your arms in that abandoned church and saw the spinning of a carousel better than any wooden horses pumping up and down a Coney Island. Here, the ESL classes for the neighbors cursed with swollen tongues in English. There, the clinics on contraception, the pestilence in the veins of the unsuspecting. Here, the karate lessons, feet spearing the air to keep schoolyard demons away. There, the dancers in white swirling their skirts to the drumming of bomba. Here, the workshops on Puerto Rican history, La Masacre de Ponce, where your mother's beloved painted his last words on the street with a fingertip of blood. I was a law student, first year, memorizing law school Latin, listening to classical guitar on my boombox as I studied the rules of property. It's mine, it's not yours. I saw only what could be proven by a preponderance of the evidence. The church abandoned by the church, the cross atop the church abandoned by the Son of God. My belly empty as St. Mary of the angels. I told you I was hungry, and we left. I wanted Chinese food. But you told me about the Chinese takeout down the block where you stood behind a man who shrieked about the price of wonton soup, left and returned with a can of gasoline, splashed it on the floor, and pulled a box of kitchen matches from his pocket. Will you wait till I pick up my egg roll and pork fried rice? You said, with a high school teacher's exasperated authority. So he did. You could talk an arsonist into postponing his inferno till you left with lunch. But you couldn't raise the dead in the ER at Greenpoint Hospital, even in your suit and tie. You couldn't convince the girl called Sugar to rise from the gurney after the gunshot drained the blood from her body. You couldn't persuade the doctor who peeled his gloves and shook his head to bring her back to life, telling him, "Do it again." An arsonist in medical scrubs trying to strike a wet match. You couldn't jumpstart the calliope in her heart so the carousel of horses would rise and fall and rise again. Whenever you saw the gutted church, you would see the sheets of the gurney dipped in red, all the gurneys rolling into the ER with a sacrifice of adolescence. We walked to the luncheonette on Havemeyer Street. A red awning announced, "Morir soñando." To die dreaming, you said, from the DR, my father's island. The boy at the counter who spoke no English, brown as my father, called Martín like me, grinned the way you grinned at El Puente once, St. Mary of the Angels. He squeezed the oranges into a drizzle of juice with evaporated milk, cane sugar, and ice, shook the elixir, and poured it till the froth spilled over the lip of the glass. Foam freckled my snout as I raised my hand for another. Intoxicated by Morir Soñando number 3 and the prophet gently rocking at my table, I had a vision. ESL classes, healing the jaws wired shut by English. Clinics full of adolescents studying the secrets of the body, unspeakable in the kitchen or the confessional. Karate students landing bare feet on the mat with a thump and grunt in unison. Bomba dancers twirling to a song in praise of Yoruba gods abolished by the priests. The words of Puerto Rican rebels painted on the walls by brushes dipped in every color, pressed in the pages of notebooks by a generation condemned to amnesia. Morir soñando. Luis, I know you died dreaming of South 4th Street, the banners that said no to the toxic waste plant down the block, or the Navy bombarding an island of fishermen for target practice thousands of miles away. Morir soñando. I know you died dreaming of gigantes, carnival mascaras bristling with horns that dangle with the angels at El Puente. Morir soñando. I know you died dreaming of the next El Puente. Morir soñando. I know you died dreaming of the hammer's claw, the drill whining to the screw, the dust like snow in a globe, then the shy genius raising her hand in the back of the room. Morir soñando. I know you died dreaming of the poets who stank of weed in the parking lot, then stood before the mic you electrified for them and rubbed their eyes when the faces in their poems gathered there, waiting for the first word so we could all die dreaming. Morir soñando, intoxicated by the elixir of the tongue. Oh, rocking prophet at my table. I'll finish my reading of this poem, and then I will take your questions as promised. So, this is the last poem in the book, and it's called Letter to My Father. My father, Francisco Luis Espada, Frank Espada, was born in the mountain town of Utuado, Puerto Rico, in the year 1930, and died in Pacifica, California in the year 2014. When Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico in the fall of 2017, 4 years ago, I saw Utuado everywhere, over and over, on TV, on the internet, in the headlines. As John Lee Anderson put it in the pages of the New Yorker, Utuado had become, quote, a byword for the island's devastation. Ultimately, more than 4,000 people died. I started talking to my father, who had died 3 years before. Actually, I started talking to his ashes in a box. And that was the genesis of this last and final poem. To change the world, we need more people like my father, who channeled his anger into art and put his art at the service of his community and his island. Letter to my father, October 2017. You once said, "My reward for this life will be 1,000 pounds of dirt shoveled in my face." You're wrong. You are 7 pounds of ashes in a box, a Puerto Rican flag wrapped around you next to a red brick from the house in Utuado where you were born, all crammed together on my bookshelf. You taught me there is no God, no life after this life, so I know you're not watching me type this letter over my shoulder. When I was a boy, you were God. I watched from the 7th floor of the projects as you walked down into the street to stop a public execution. A big man caught a small man stealing his car, and everyone in Brooklyn heard the car alarm wail of the condemned, "He's killing me!" And a word from you, the executioner's hand slipped from the hair of the thief. "The kid was high," was all you said when you came back to us. When I was a boy and you were God, we flew to Puerto Rico. You said, "My grandfather was the mayor of Utuado. His name was Buenaventura. That means good fortune." I believed in your grandfather's name. I heard the tree frogs chanting to each other all night. I saw a banana leaf and elephant palm sprouting from the mountain's belly. I gnawed the mango's pit, and the sweet yellow hair stuck between my teeth. I said to you, "You came from another planet. How'd you do it?" You said, "Every morning, just before I woke up, I saw the mountains. Every morning, I see the mountains." And Utuado, 3 sisters, all in their 70s, all bedridden, all Pentecostales, who only left the house for church, lay sleeping on mattresses spread across the floor when the hurricane gutted the mountain, the way a butcher slices open a dangled pig, and a rolling wall of mud buried them, leaving the 4th sister to stagger into the street screaming like an unheeded prophet about the end of the world. And Utuado, a man who cultivated a garden of aguacate and carambola, feeding the avocado and star fruit to his nieces from New York, so the trees in his garden beheaded all at once like the soldiers of a beaten army, and so hanged himself. And Utuado, a welder and a handyman, rigged a pulley with a shopping cart to ferry rice and beans across the river where the bridge collapsed, witnessed the cart swaying above so many hands that raised a sign that told the helicopters, "Campamento Los Olvidados," Camp of the Forgotten. Los Olvidados wait 7 hours in line for a government meal of Skittles and Vienna sausage, or a tarp to cover the bones of a house with no roof, as the fungus grows on their skin from sleeping on mattresses drenched with the spit of the hurricane. They drink the brown water waiting for microscopic monsters in their bellies to visit plagues upon them. A nurse says, "These people are going to have an epidemic. These people are going to die." The president flips rolls of paper towels to a crowd in a church in Guaynabo, Zeus lobbing thunderbolts on the locked ward of his delusions. Down the block, cousin Ricardo, Bernice's boy, says that somebody stole his can of diesel. I heard somebody ask you once if Puerto Rico needed to be free, and you said, 3 pulgadas de sangre en la calle. 3 inches of blood in the street. Now, 3 inches of mud flow through the streets of Utuado, and troops patrol the town, as if guarding the vein of copper in the ground, as if a shovel digging graves in the backyard might strike the ore below, as if La Brigada, swinging machetes to clear the road, might remember the last uprising. I know you are not God. I have the proof. 7 pounds of ashes in a box on my bookshelf. Gods do not die, and yet I want you to be God again. Stride from the crowd to seize the president's arm before another roll of paper towel sails away. Thunder Spanish obscenities in his face. Banish him to a roofless rainstorm in Utuado so he unravels one soaked sheet after another till there is nothing left but his cardboard heart. I promised myself I would stop talking to you, white box of gray grit. You were death even before you died. Hear my promise now. I will take you to the mountains where houses lost like ships at sea rise blue and yellow from the mud. I will open my hands. I will scatter your ashes. En Utuado. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much.
Can we give Professor Espada one more round of applause, please? I'm sure many of you are moved to know I was by the poetry and the reading and also speaking about the importance of poetry and its impact in social justice movements and activities. We want to open the mic to everyone, so there's going to be 2 mics, one here in the front and one in the back. I know you all have been engaging with questions of the ideas that change the world, and so we want to open it up for questions, reflections, comments, thoughts that you all may have for Professor Espada. So I want to welcome you all, and again, you all are brilliant, wonderful students, so I'm sure you all have been thinking about this as he was reading and as he was sharing with us tonight. So I'm going to open up the floor. And of course, folks from the community and faculty are also welcome to ask questions as well. Oh, we're bringing at the mic. So if you want to ask a question, you can come. Yes, it's okay. Go ahead.
Hi. Oh, wow, sorry. Hi. First
Hi.
off, it's nice to see you in person. I'm Jess. I'm in your Zoom class.
You're in my class?
I am.
Oh, wow.
Nice to see you in person.
Well, so you know, speak up.
Well, so I was wondering, based on the political nature of your work, as we all know, ignorance is not an option. But when you're engaging so heavily with all of this stuff, how do you stay hopeful? How do you find reasons, I guess, to keep going?
It has everything to do with being able to come to a place like this and share those words with people like you. Now, I realize that sounds like I'm buttering you up, but
there's a great deal of truth to it. And one of the problems I have been having over the last year and a half with everything on Zoom was that I wasn't having the same kinds of engagement on the human level to sustain me, because it does sustain me, and it sustains my hope in particular. I wouldn't write a single poem if I were hopeless. I wouldn't tell a single story if I were hopeless. I am presenting this generation and the next with people who inhabited my life and gave me hope by modeling hope themselves. So, I read a poem about Luis Cardenal Costa, and he was one of those people, and I hope this comes across in the poem, who radiated this extraordinary energy, no matter what was going on. And there were times when I would look at him and say, "What the hell are you smiling at?" And he always had a good answer for that. He was remarkably hopeful, and I'm talking about in situations that were for anyone, despairing. And then there are those who give you hope even while they're snarling and spitting. My father was like that. And everything you heard him say in that last poem, he actually said at one point or another. That's what he was like, and but he never gave up. He never stopped fighting. And this was someone who had a very difficult history, someone who could have given up at the age of 19 when my father was in the Air Force and was stationed in San Antonio at Lackland Air Force Base. And he took a bus through the South on his way home to spend furlough with his family in 1949, December. And in December of 1949, my father was arrested and thrown into jail in Biloxi, Mississippi for refusing to go to the back of the bus. And he spent a week in jail. He said it was the best week of his life because he figured out what to do with the rest of it, which was to get out and fight, And so I look at them and I say, if they could be hopeful with everything that was crashing down on them, how can I possibly afford the luxury of despair? When you think about that dynamic between hope and despair, there are times, to be sure, and we're living through one of those times now. It is so hard to be hopeful, but consider the alternative. Every single one of you got up today. Every single one of you got dressed. Every single one of you came into this room. Every single one of you is listening to me now. That's the embodiment of hope. And so I thank you for that. And I thank you for the question.
I know there was another question already. You can come to this microphone.
Hi there. I was just curious, what made you choose poetry as opposed to other mediums?
Well, most poets would answer that by saying something poetic, like, poetry chose me, which in a sense it did. But the more complete answer is to say that there's something I find very satisfying about poetry as a medium of storytelling. I do write poems that aren't narratives, but most of them are, as you heard tonight, especially given the theme for the evening. So there's something to me enormously satisfying about finding a metaphor that speaks for more than itself, finding the face that has many faces, finding the moment that stands for a century. Poetry is the art of the concise. I can say in 2 pages what it might take an essayist 20 pages to say, or a novelist 200 pages to say. And it has everything to do with finding not just a good word or a better word, but the best word. Our focus here tonight is on social justice. It's a focus on ideas that change the world, so necessarily it's on content. I have at least as much to say about craft, right? About how to make a poem. And for me, this comes back to that enormous sense of satisfaction in the word. And obviously not just the word on the page, but the word on the stage. You may have noticed I was leaning into that reading a little bit, you know. And that to me it's that the satisfaction of that medium saying most of the time exactly what it is I want to say. And we all have to find our poetry. For some people here, poetry is your poetry. For some people, fiction is your poetry. For some people, you know, medicine will be your poetry, or law will be your poetry, or social work will be your poetry, or you know, marching in the street and organizing others. That's your poetry. Whatever it is, you have to find your poetry.
Thank you.
So we have time for a few more questions, as I also want to leave time for those of you who want to purchase a book or say hello to Professor Espada. He will be in the back as well. So we have time for a couple more questions.
So during the letter to your father,
I'm sorry, could you speak up?
a letter to your father.
Yes.
You said that he said that there is no God, and that resonated with me because my father said the exact same thing once. So would you mind explaining his reasoning and perhaps your reasoning why there is no God?
Well, my father's reasoning was based on his life experience, but also based on his experience with the church. So it was, when he said that sort of thing, it was because of his rejection by the Catholic Church and the circumstances of that rejection, which I touched upon in the previous poem, the one called Morir Soñando. Because my father came over here from the island of Puerto Rico, and he settled on the Upper West Side of Manhattan with his family. And he was surrounded by a community of Irish Americans who were very religious, who went to church. And so, of course, he went also. And he had a confrontation at church. He asked a priest, as he recalled, it was a big Irish American priest, about the catechism. And you know, how could there be 3 gods in one? And he probably put it like that, because my father was always a bit of a wise ass. And the priest hauled off and belted him in the face. And, you know, my mother still tells the story. And she says, you know your father. He punched him back. You know, so this was the beginning of this was the beginning of his disenchantment, of his disillusionment. He left the church at that point, and then he started reading. And he found that he was able to argue with and puzzle his friends. Like, all of his enemies in the community were Irish American, but all of his friends in the community were also Irish American. And he ended up, my father, who, by the way, was 6 foot 4 inches, the tallest Puerto Rican in New York. He ended up playing on a basketball team called the Shamrocks. This is a New York story. You know, and so he grew up loving these guys, and they loved him, but they always saw the world differently as a result of that. You know, as far as my own belief system, there was my father, the lapsed Catholic, in the household. And my mother is a Jehovah's Witness. Yes. Imagine having one already inside the house. So, there was some tension in my household when it came to all things spiritual. And I watched my parents really go at it over this. And they would ambush each other. You know, my mother one time put out all my father's treasured Christmas decorations for the garbage. And they came and they took the Christmas decorations away and threw them out. And then she came and told them. And that was a big fight. You know, and then they got into other, you know, and being a child growing up in that household, I just wanted the fighting to stop. And I saw the divisions created within my own household by religion and by a belief in God that my mother insisted upon imposing on the rest of us, right? So, you know, you take this ultimately, you take this experience away. Now, you know, as far as a belief in God, capital G, you know, I'm not going to stand up here and tell you I know absolutely for sure. You know, I would like not to be struck by lightning tonight. But my life's experience and my both personal and political makes me question the existence of a benevolent supreme being just because I am witness to so much suffering in the world. And no one has been able to satisfactorily answer that question that so many of us, including some of you I'm sure, have already posed. If there is a just and benevolent God, why is there so much human suffering down here on earth? So the best way I can answer your question is with a question.
We have time for one more question.
Yeah, we can't end with a question about the existence of God.
Yes.
I'm curious, who are your favorite poets? Other than yourself, of course.
Well, I'm mightily pleased with myself. Well, you know, it would be easy for me to stand here and tick off the names of the canon, but you're going to probably find those poets on your own. What I like to do is tell you about poets you never heard of. And there is a poem for example, there's a poem in this book called Flan, you know, that custard. And it is an elegy for a poet I hope you will all find, if you can find him. His name was Jack Agueros, A-G-U-E-R-O-S, the two dots over the U, Agueros. Jack Agueros was a New York, Puerto Rican poet, among other things. He was also a fiction writer and a playwright and a translator and a community organizer and the director of the Museo del Barrio, the only Puerto Rican museum in the mainland United States at the time. Jack was like my second father. We were that close. And so I have this elegy in the book for him. Jack, of course, right, smartest guy in the room, developed Alzheimer's. And it took me a long time to sort of figure it out. And by the time I figured it out, I felt tremendously guilty for all the times I had been impatient with him. But his poetry was published by small presses. Hanging Loose Press, they had a book called Correspondence Between the Stonehullers, another book called Sonnets from the Puerto Rican, which is a play on the Sonnets from the Portuguese by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. He wrote sonnets and he wrote psalms. And I'm not sure if he believed in God, but he believed in psalms. And he wrote a book called Lord, Is This a Psalm? He was a very funny guy. So I want you to go out and see if you can find Jack Agueros, right? Because there's somebody otherwise you would never hear about, right? You know, I can totally embarrass my wife too and say you must read the works of Lauren Marie Schmidt, right? Hey, I just did. So, you know, there's a way in which I think you will all find your poets. And what we don't realize very often when we are practicing poets ourselves is that your greatest influences are standing right next to you. You know, you say, oh yes, well I love the collected works of William Carlos Williams. Okay, cool. But no poet ever had the impact on me that Jacques Agueros did. And the least I could do for him now that he's gone is tell you all about him.
So I know we've been doing a lot of applauding tonight, but we have to do one more round of applause for our wonderful speaker, Professor Espada. I want to again invite you all to really take time to check out the books and to meet him. He will be in the back. I also publicly wanted to say, Martín, thank you for always being so generous and kind to me. I came here as a new assistant professor back in 2000, and the first person, well, one of the first people that I met was Professor Espada. And I was coming from Los Angeles and feeling incredibly overwhelmed and out of my element coming from Southern California to New England and Western Massachusetts in particular. And Martín was someone who immediately connected with me and reached out and said, not only do you belong here, but I really have faith that you're going to stay here and do amazing work. And so, Martín, honestly, I actually am feeling a little emotional right now, because then you were really so inspirational and so important in my trajectory here as a professor, and continuing to stay here, and your friendship and your love has always been important. So, gracias, de veras. I really, really appreciate it. I really appreciate you.
Thank you.